Hey, this is Miss V. Welcome back. We're talking about industrialization, and here we're going to focus on the growth of industrial prosperity, especially in places like Europe, and how it spread throughout Europe. Alright, so let's go ahead and start. These are your standards. Again, we're focusing on continental Europe this time and the spread of industrialization in those areas and how it quickly developed into new philosophies, political and economic philosophies. All right. And these are your vocabulary. Again, if you're doing the appetizer with the vocabulary, you can use this information to help you. All right. So the spread of industrialization in continental Europe. So again, Britain prospered in industrialization, but places like France did not, which is your answer for number one, because one, they had political instability. Remember that this was the same time when France was still going through their French Revolution, and also Napoleon was overthrowing the Directory, becoming emperor, and all of that stuff. So there was a lot of political problems still happening in France. So that's why industrialization did not spread as quickly to them. And then also they did not have a good source of coal and to fuel their factories and railroads. So that also presented a problem as well. Okay. However, places like Germany, especially places like Prussia, were able to take advantage of iron and coal resources and the unification of the German states. So Germany, what we know it as today, during the late 1700s, before industrialization, they were independent states or independent nations along with Prussia. But now they unified, right? And became this one nation called Germany. And because of that accelerated their growth in industrialization and railroad development. And now Germany is going to become this powerful industrial nation in the 1900s, especially in the late 1800s, 1900s. All right. Okay. So this is the chart. This is the comparison of the first and second revolutions. So the first revolution, which happened in the early 18th century, that gave rise to textiles and railroads and iron and coal. Okay. So that's the late, about the 1700s, mid 1700s and so forth. Okay. So their goods were transported faster. Okay. That was the central idea. Okay. In the second Industrial Revolution, which was the late 18th century and the early 19th century, right? So the 1900s, the focus was more on efficiency and an ease of life. So steel and chemicals and electricity and petroleum or gas, they led the way for new technologies or new machinery to be produced and invented. Okay, because the focus was being more efficient and having a better life or ease of life. Okay, so that's your chart when you're doing the comparison of the first and second revolution, or in the first and second industrial revolution. All right. This is number 3 and 4. So Henry Bessemer, the Bessemer process was taking molten pig iron and making high quality steel that was more efficient and more cheaply produced or created. And because of that process, instead of using iron, they're going to be using steel. And steel was lighter, it was smaller, and it was faster to be able to produce these faster machines and these faster engines. That's going to allow for faster transportation. And faster transportation means more goods, and more goods means cheaper goods. Okay, so that's going to allow people to buy more products. All right, so you're gonna see that as we come forward in a little bit when we talk more about the transportation process. Also new forms, well, we wouldn't say new, newly encountered forms of energy has been encountered or used, right? So electricity is a natural phenomenon. It's been around since the dawn of time, since, you know, the earth has been around. However, people are, you know, man did not take electricity and use it to as a form of energy, such as heat and light and motion and transportation, etc., and using it through wires. Now they figured that out. Okay, now they're figuring out that they can use electricity as an energy source. So now that they're using that, they're using it in conveyor belts and cranes and machines, and it's all powered by electricity. And now they're actually using it for lighting, right? And with the use or the invention of lighting, like light bulbs, etc., now factories can stay open 24 hours a day. It doesn't have to be sun up and sun down like on the farm or in the plantation where, you know, slaves or laborers worked from sun up to sun down. Now in the factories, they work in 24 hours a day in shifts, right? All right. So let's continue. Oops. All right. So these are the inventors that's listed. You can go through each one of them. Make sure that you have the description of what they invented and what's important to them for each one, right? I made sure to include Louis H. Latimer, who is an African-American inventor and engineer who worked with Thomas Edison and invented and improved the carbon filament in a light bulb, right? Of course, many of us use LED lights right now, or LED light bulbs, but before the LED light bulb, we did have carbon filaments in our light bulbs, okay? And that was invented and improved on by Louis H. Latimer. And of course, there's some other inventors here that made major contributions to society and changed the landscape of the society in general, or the world in general, moving it towards a more technological, a more modern society, right? All right, so this is number 7. With the advent or the use of petroleum, gasoline, right? Now you have an internal combustion engine that can be fired by oil and gas, right? And now that's providing a new source of transportation. Those new sources of transportation were liners, ocean liners, airplanes, and automobiles, right? And the first automobile was created by Henry Ford, the Model T Ford, okay? Which you're going to find out in a few about Henry Ford. And here you're going to see an example of a combustion engine. You see the induction, how it's compressed. It makes a spark, which you saw there, and then it brings out exhaust, right? So that spark is allowing the engine to be powered so that it can move the machinery, right? And because of that process, now they are able to create transportation machines that are able to be more efficient, faster, and easier to transport goods across the nations, across countries, etc. Right? All right, cool. Number 8. This is Orville and Wilbur Wright. They made the first flight in a fixed-wing airplane, as you see here, and that happened in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Okay, and because of that first flight, that changed the landscape of travel forever, right? So now airplanes are becoming a big thing in terms of travel, in terms of transporting goods and services, or even just overall for defense purposes for countries, military-wise, etc. Right? Okay. Number 9. Because of those new advancements in transportation, right? Now, if they're able to move faster and their transportation costs are lower, that means the prices for manufactured goods are going to be lower, okay? Because those transportation costs are lower. So again, that was a major shift for societies during this time, because now they have more access to goods that they would not be able to have access to because of transportation, the transportation of taking goods and goods to various areas that they were not able to access before. Also, the biggest reasons for a more efficient production was the assembly line, which is the next one, number 10. Henry Ford. Henry Ford is known for making the first car in the United States called the Model T Ford. And the Model T Ford was produced on an assembly line. The assembly line allowed for a more efficient process or production of goods. Okay? Made it faster, more quality, and they were able to do it in a cheap manner because they were paid cheaply. Okay? Laborers were not paid that well, but they were able to crank out a lot of cars because of this assembly line process. So, in the assembly line process, as you see here, there are women, well, actually, these are men. So these are men that are assembling, it looks like some kind of part for the car. And that was their job to do on that assembly line. They would come to work every single day and do the same job in that assembly line. And then there were other laborers that would do something else to put the Model T Ford together, right? So it was different parts and pieces that were assembled together, much like you would put a Lego system, right? Or if you had different parts of a Lego and you just take different pieces, and if each person had their specific job to put those pieces together to create this thing, that would be considered an assembly line, right? Okay, so that's pretty much what happened here with Henry Ford, right? Okay, working classes, as I mentioned before with the Model T Ford and Henry Ford, and workers were not paid that well, okay? And their conditions in work was not good at all. Their living conditions was not good. So a lot of the workers had a desire to improve their working and living conditions. And not only that, they wanted to equalize their wealth and control the working conditions that they had. Equalizing the wealth meaning that they wanted to have an equal platform of how much people earned in a society. That led to many political parties that were socialist and also unions that were socialist. And that's a theory that's developed by this guy. And that was the answer for 12. So as you see, you should see the highlighted answer. But that was developed for this guy, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a social scientist, political scientist, philosopher, you name it, author. He did it in terms of politics and economics. And his idea is that there are two groups. One group is called the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, as you recall, those are the people that owned everything. They had the money, they had the land, they had the manufacturing companies, they had the factories, and they controlled the government and society, right? On the other hand, the proletariat were the oppressed. They were the ones working in these conditions, in these harsh conditions, and they depended on the bourgeoisie in order to survive, okay? Karl Marx believed that there's going to be a struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and that's going to cause a revolution. But he said that the final revolution, which is your number 15, will produce a classless society. A classless society meaning that everyone is on equal status. There's no such thing as class. No such thing as a bourgeoisie. No such thing as a proletariat. No such thing as a middle class. No rich, no poor, none of that. That everybody is going to be on an equal playing field. That was his idea. Okay. And that the bourgeoisie would just wither away because, you know, the working class are going to overcome the bourgeoisie. That was his ideology. That was his thinking. Okay. 16, 17, and 18. So taking those ideas, the working class leaders took those ideas of Marxist ideas, and now they developed this political economic philosophy called socialism. They wanted to take bad working conditions that was created in their working environment, and they wanted to equalize the wealth and control working conditions. Okay. So some socialist groups started to spring up to fight against capitalism, and some of these groups were considered pure Marxists. So in any political system, you have like a middle ground, and then you have extremes. One of the extremes in this case in socialism was pure Marxists. Pure Marxists are basically saying capitalism is a pit, and we should, as the proletariat, should just take them over with a violent revolution and be done with the bourgeoisie, period. Okay? That was their idea. That's number 17. Revisionists were different. This is your 18. Revisionists said, no, we're not going to have any violent overthrowing or violent revolution. We are able to organize ourselves as a big political party and use our influence to work with other parties to try to gain reforms through legislation, through mediation, etc. Okay? So those were the two groups that kind of formed through Marx's ideas of socialism. All right? So that's 16, 17, and 18. Another thing that came out of socialism, right, was trade unions. Okay? Trade unions, their whole idea was to improve. These were workers that would literally come together as a group, and their main purpose or their main goal was to improve their working conditions and their wages. Okay, so they organized themselves as labor unions, and some of the stipulations that they would put in place or demands was the right to strike. Okay, so in a strike, that union calls on all of its members to stop working, to put pressure on the employee to say, hey, if we stop working, you're going to have to meet these demands, or else we will not continue to work until these demands are taken care of and our safety is improved, our wages are higher, and whatever demands that they ask for. Okay? Now, of course, an employer is not going to want to have their workers stop working, because that means production is halted, right? So they're going to have to negotiate or mediate in order to make sure that their demands are taken care of. All right? And that's how trade unions came about. And that's why we actually celebrate Labor Day, because of labor unions that were established. Okay? So, and this is a picture of a labor union or trade union strike in the United States. As you see here, most of these are workers. All right? And they're standing their ground, not going into work, because they're demanding higher wages and better working conditions. All right, so this is your chart assignment or chart analysis on the back of 10.2. You're going to answer the 2 questions based on this chart, and a lot of it is based on what we talked about with the shift in continental Europe in terms of the Industrial Revolution. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.